today on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. To deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city and plenty of areas of expertise, from purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, to any sort of loans, equipment, car and personal loans. Well, he's a great of the Australian Olympic team, a great of rowing, because he competed in 4 Olympic Games. He won 3 gold medals and a silver medal. It's a darn good effort. And, of course, he managed to win medals in, of course, the Oarsome Foursome in 1996. He won a gold medal in the Coxless pairs in 2004 and 2008, and a silver again in the Coxless fours in 2012. And in between, and we'll get to this, he was some chance of representing Australia in another sport. But we'll let you just sit on the edge of your seats, and we'll ask you, or we'll ask him very soon what that sport was. But he actually did pretty well in that sport when he took a bit of a break from rowing before going back to rowing. Drew Ginn, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here. And mate, what an introduction that was. I feel like I've been set up here on a pedestal. It's exciting to be here and good to be able to chat to you about not only my career, but also the career of the athletes that I was involved with over the years. And I know you've had a chance to chat to James Tomkins as well. So looking forward to the conversation.
It was a great career. Do you look back and think, wow?
Mate, it's actually interesting. I find myself regularly thinking it's someone else's life or someone else's sporting career. And what I preface here is, when you're a young kid at 10, 11 years of age and you watch the Olympic Games on TV, I remember watching Debbie Flintoff-King in the 88 Olympic Games around 12 years of age. I remember watching that going, cool, wouldn't that be amazing to do? Never thinking it was possible. Then as your teenage years go by, you get involved in rowing, and then you have this experience, which is 16 years, and then you come out the other side of it and you look back and you go, that was almost someone else. Like someone else doing that, having that experience. I think I messaged you in a note as to my thing about the Oarsome Foursome was, it's almost like the Oarsome Foursome was hero. They were my heroes, and I looked up to them. And then you get a chance to actually be in the boat with them. So I feel like it was a gift. It was almost like the best Christmas present ever, to be able to not only row with them, but also have a career that I've had, which has been extraordinary. Yeah.
Do you think, though, you're playing down how good you were? Because and I'm fast forwarding a bit here, Andrew Cooper retires. You finished school in 1992. Now, I do know this, that James was involved in the Scotch College crew as a coach, James Tomkins.
He was the coach. One of the coaches, Laurie Malcolm, with Laurie Malcolm, Paul McGann.
Okay. So you're in obviously in good hands there. They've seen something in you, incredibly, by the age of 20, when Andrew Cooper retires. You're in with the Oarsome Foursome. I mean, how did that happen so quickly? So you must have had ability from someone who 3 years earlier was in the head of the river with Scotch College.
Yeah, I got lucky. Timing. It's a bit of timing in this. I mean, I don't question that I was like James and Nick and Mike and Coops. Like, you've got some physical talent, so that's not lost on me. But if I hadn't have been coached by James, Laurie and Paul through that sort of year 12 year at Scotch, and if I had, my dad hadn't sent me to boarding school for 4 years. Like, I was sent to boarding school, basically South Gippsland kid growing up in Inverloch, getting into a fair bit of trouble. So Dad was like, right, I've made a commitment to your mum. We're going to send you to boarding school. So if all that hadn't happened, then I don't know that I actually would have made it. So talent alone doesn't do it, as we know. But it was one of those just unbelievable things. I remember watching James. I walked into the boat shed one day at school. I actually didn't know who he was. Sean Evans was the stroke of the crew that I rowed in the year 12 year. And I remember walking through the sheds and seeing this guy rowing the ergo, and he was just unbelievable at what he was doing. And I was like, I had no idea. I was like, I've just seen the scores on the screen. By the time I walked outside, I turned to Sean and I said, who's that? And he goes, James Tomkins, one of the best rowers in the world. And I was like, what? And so, it's one of those sort of pinch me moments as a young kid to actually see athletes like that and, get exposed to them. And, to go on to have the career is, as I say, it's a gift. That's for sure. So I'm humble about it because rowing's about team, and I'm humble about it because I just know that so many coaches and athletes that I rowed with contribute to your success. It's not what you do individually. That's for sure.
He's now one of your best mates, Drew.
He is. We've known each other since 1991 now.
Yeah. And you've had a lot of success together, of course, in the pairs, which we'll get to shortly. Why rowing? Did you fall into it, or was it something you liked to do as soon as you saw it?
Dan, this is how do I describe this? I have to acknowledge two people. Doug Galbraith was a boarding house master at school who very early on said, "You're tall, you should give rowing a go." And I basically said rowing was for meatheads. So I've never lived that down as to comment. But it was actually Bram McLeod, who was a maths teacher who persisted over weeks and weeks and weeks to sort of go, yeah, would you consider rowing? And indulge for a second here on the story. But Bram basically took me down to the boat sheds. He was an adventure teacher, maths class. I was not great in maths, but I was okay. But he was one of those teachers who just cared about all these students. So to take you down the boat sheds and actually put you in a boat for the first time. So it didn't just happen by chance. I didn't choose it. It was actually him seeing something for me that no one else was really seeing at the time. And he was the coach of the sixth crew, so you have the first, second, thirds all the way down. So it wasn't like he was going to poach a kid into his sport and have him for, 1 or 2 seasons. It was like he's introducing a kid like me to the sport, knowing full well that, potentially you'll move on very quickly. But that first rowing experience, I fell out of the boat. So, it wasn't overly successful.
What did you think after you fell out of the boat? This isn't for me, or
mate,
because of Mr. McLeod, I better give it a go again?
It was bloody embarrassing, I tell you.
Yeah,
it was, I'd come from swimming, and I'm pretty sure I've thought about this a lot. There was a lot of students on the riverbank because people were getting off the water. And here was me in a tub scull. Tub sculls are quite wide. So you think about your hips, another 10, 15 centimetres wider either side. So they're a big, stable boat. You're not supposed to flip them. So I flipped this thing and I was swimming. I couldn't get back in. And that's the one thing they don't tell you is how to get back in the boat when they give you instructions about how to row. So I swam it back to shore, and all these kids, I remember just feeling like they were laughing at me, pointing fingers and all that sort of stuff. I was like, stuff you, I'm going to work out how to do this. So, but he was awesomely supportive. He was like, that's the sort of experience that rowing is. Like, it's not easy. If you're up for it, you'll learn the skills. And he got me back involved in his boat the next day, which was the eight athletes rowing with the coxswain, and I was at the very pointy end of the boat, and it was just so much liveliness, and having the whole team feeling was outstanding. So if it hadn't been for him for those 2 days, I wouldn't have started rowing.
Outside your family, he must have been just about the proudest person in the world when you won gold in 1996, Drew.
It's an interesting thing. I saw my brother recently, and he was at the 96 games with my dad. My dad recently passed away 4 years ago. And my brother was describing what my dad was like in the grandstand. And he said he's never seen someone so proud. And I'm sure all parents are like this with any athletes or anyone they see achieving success in their family. I think I'm proud of what I've done. But I know that my family close to me have gone through the whole thing where they've seen the ups and downs and everything. And so, as a 21-year-old kid at that stage, my mum had passed away when I was 11.
Yes.
My dad was there, my brother was there, family and friends, other people were there. And so I like the idea that when we celebrate as athletes, it's not just about us, it's actually about all those people that have helped you get to that start line and get through that race. And for me, it was a collective experience, that's for sure.
Tough for your mum to pass away at 11. How challenging was it for an 11-year-old at the time? I mean, obviously, eventually life has to go on, but when you're 11 years old and you lose your mum, it's pretty hard for life to go on for a little while, isn't it, Drew?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've had a love-hate. She died from cancer, so and I'm an avid supporter of cancer and do a lot of fundraising and all that sort of stuff in that area. My thing is, as 11, I didn't comprehend it, to be fair. I don't think an 11-year-old or kid that age will really understand fully, but it was a love-hate relationship with cancer. But I think for my mind, I think her passing actually gave me motivation to say, well, make the best time that you've got, and make use of that. And so I think it shaped me a lot as a young kid that then led to me being in the kind of athlete I was, where I think I got the idea of working with others, like working with James. I just loved helping and making that work. Oarsome Foursome, same sort of thing. And so the loss is hard. And you know, I remember as a kid, you know, not being able to deal with it for many, many years in particular. But as a teenager into the athlete space, it was like, okay, how do I use this as fuel? Life's short. You get an opportunity. You may only get to go to the games once. You may only get to row with a great teammate like James and like Nick and Mike once. So make it count. And I think, you know, her passing probably set me up on a trajectory to actually be successful in that regard. So that's a love-hate sort of guilt sort of thing that I sort of deal with as an athlete. That's for sure.
Triple Olympic gold medalist Drew Ginn's my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, who deal with anyone in Australia, and they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. So you go to 1996, you're a lot younger than James, Mike, and a few years younger than Nick. Obviously, though, you all got on pretty well. Was it a seamless transition?
No.
It wasn't.
It's how do I describe it? Like I think so much about the four was lively. I've probably reflected on this a lot in the last few years, which is, yeah, like there was so much good about it, but there was also so much conflict and challenge at certain times, not all the time, but just at certain times. And I think egos and friction and trying to work out how to get success. They'd won in 92 with Andrew Cooper. They'd won in 1990, 91 with Sam Patton and Andrew Cooper.
Yeah.
So by the time 96 rolls around, I mean, I just think for the context of this is like, they didn't succeed in Finland Tampere the year before. Andrew's retired. I've come in. For me, it was a dream. Like everything they did, I thought was perfect, to be honest. But once I got inside the tent, what was quite interesting was Mike and James were two key leaders of the boat, and there was friction there at certain times. Noel was trying to manage it. Lots of good planning, lots of good discussions about honesty meetings and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, it was a really lively experience, which was at times the roller coaster was up, the roller coaster was down, lots of pushing to get better and faster. And then lots of times where just brutal truths were being spoken about, experiences and all that sort of stuff. So for me, it was one of the best learning experiences as to how a team actually has to function in reality versus the hero sort of stuff on the surface, which is you've had success because you're amazing at combining. We had to work, like the group had to work. Noel had to be an amazing coach to manage that process, and everyone had to compromise at different times. But we also needed a lot of drive around belief of what we could succeed. And Elsie's a young kid, so I was on a bit of a coattail experience. But for me, yeah, it was awesome. It was a circus. Like it was never a dull day or never a dull moment, as they sort of say in that situation. And some of the most vivid memories of conflict management came to life, say 2 days out before the final, where we're at each other after a semi-final. We've had a conversation the next morning, which we called the honesty meeting. Noel facilitated. And so for me as a young athlete, it was like nothing was perfect, but we just kept working and working the process to be successful. And so what a great life lesson, for me and for the guys, because I think it paved the way for so many things we do else in the rest of our lives and in work, that's for sure.
While we were at each other 2 days before a final, I wouldn't have thought that's an ideal preparation, but maybe it was for you guys.
No, not ideal, but reality, right? So we, the guys had said, and I was included in this, we want to win the heat, want to win the semi-final, and we win the final. We want to dominate the Atlanta Olympic Games. 12 months before, the idea was, how do we define success? Gold medal, drivers and inhibitors, row long, row well, row fast, and have fun, right? So these were the things. We didn't win the semi-final, and there was a sense in the semi-final that it hadn't quite gone to plan. And so when we got off the water, bit by bit, people are blaming each other in bits and pieces and searching for reason. Noel was amazing at just going, hey guys, cool it. There's a bit of heat in all this. How do we come back the next morning and have a conversation? But that for me was a watershed moment with the Oarsome Foursome. And it was one of those things of, we had an honesty meeting that next morning, which was all about, Mike walked in the room last, and it was awesome, where he just turned around and said, hey guys, I've sort of held back in the semi-final, partly because I wanted to conserve a bit of energy for the final. And that was, as leadership goes, that was outstanding. And for me, it was that vulnerability, that authenticity as to, it doesn't need to be perfect when none of us are perfect. We had a plan, we didn't execute, but let's be honest about why we didn't execute, and let's make amends as to how we're going to do it better in 2 days' time. So, before going in, I didn't know any of that. I also didn't know a lot of the history. So I loved the fact that it was ups and downs at times. And that 96 result didn't come out of accident or talent. It came out of really hard work and great, honest conversations about agreeing on what we needed to do to succeed.
Noel must have been a great man manager. I mean, James had him as coach for a long, long time, and you obviously had him as coach as well. What made him a great man manager?
I think his ability, one, he was passionate about the sport and he was passionate about development and caring for people. He would be so patient with people and athletes. We would get off the water and you could have a 90-minute, 2-hour debrief on a rowing session, and Noel would hang in there as a coach to facilitate that conversation because he thought, okay, this is important to do today. So his patience was good. His vision was good. Like, he always sort of had that sense of, how do we get these guys harmonizing to an endpoint in their careers in the stage of the event? And he'd spend time with each one of us. So I was 20 years of age and he was indulging me with all the passions of a 20-year-old. The other end of the scale, he's got Mike and James, who have been with him for a long, long time. So different, but he's indulging them and managing them, as to James is carefree and laid back and talented. Mike's aggressive and determined and competitive. And so his ability to work with different styles of athletes, but in the four, and I'm sure it was tiring as well, but his ability to hold that group together, I think it was amazing. I've seen only a few coaches do that really well in rowing, and Noel sort of stands up there with Chris O'Brien, my other coach, as to doing that skill really well.
Once you had the honesty meeting, did you feel that you were pretty right for the final? You could win it?
Yeah. I hadn't won a gold medal before, and my sense, Dan, was I sat in that room and it was we're in Dahlonega, and it was a college in Dahlonega, South Georgia kind of thing, in Atlanta. And it was a downstairs room. And I remember when Mike spoke, and then James and Nick sort of chimed in and said, well, if you've got more to give, we've definitely got more to give, kind of thing, was the way I remember it. Mate, I'm 21 years of age, and I was just like, okay, the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders, and it was almost like, far out. I mean, I can use expletives here, but this is happening, right? These guys, I believe in them. They believe in what we're doing. I'm a part of that. And just that, I don't know how long it went for. It was 90 minutes maybe as we were having the conversation. But for me, it was, I sort of say watershed. It was that sort of realization. It was the final agreement we had to make, which was, we're really buying into what we do as a process, as in a team. And there's no holding back, right? The Olympic Games final, as we all know in any event, it's like, you don't have a choice. You either go or you don't go. You get found out really quickly. And so, but as a collective unit, you have to have that agreement to say we're going to go, and then we really back it up. So I felt like in that moment, it was like the next 2 days are just, we've got to go through the process. But it was like that sense of, we're in this, we're going to do this. It was quite powerful. And
during the race, you felt pretty good. It was a good performance.
Unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. I was, I'm not sure about how sort of James has described. James was sitting in front of me. So 7 weeks out from the games, he was steering and actually making the race calls in the boat, which is verbalizing the stages of the race and the plan. They handed the role over to me to actually verbalize the race plan, and James was just then steering. So in Atlanta, I had this whole script in my mind, which was Mike stroking, Nick's the best follower, James is unbelievable at what he's doing is following and steering the boat, and then I'm here to be the voice piece of where we're at on the course, what the technical focus is, and basically a bit of motivation, I suppose, in that regard. From the very first stroke, particularly in the first 2 or 3 strokes, it was like, what we've taken off exactly as we've done in training. So that was executing perfectly to plan. And within about 400 meters, it was like, actually, we're up the front of the field here. Like, the Italians, Romanians were slightly ahead. But I remember sort of feeling in the bow seat, because I'm sort of slightly closer to the finish line, you get to celebrate before the other guys. But my periphery was really clear. And so it was like, we've never started this well against the whole competition, like that whole year when I'd raced with them. We'd always been behind. We'd always been way behind. And so at the final, it's like, we're actually at the front of the field. And so it was just a matter of executing the race plan from that stage on. And I remember thinking maybe 600 meters to go, like, this is a dream come true. James was telling me to shut up in the boat and be quiet, stay focused. But it was that whole thing of, it just felt like the script was playing out perfectly, which is, I know it's a bit rare to have a plan work perfectly, but it did on that day.
Big responsibility for a 20-year-old to be given the job of instructing your more experienced crewmates what to do.
Yes, is the answer to that. And I mean, you've got a sense here, I don't mind being a bit verbal and excited.
No, I know that. I don't either, Drew. It's nothing wrong with that.
No,
So,
it was interesting.
yeah.
It was interesting to say, like, so where this came about was we were in Lucerne 7 weeks before. We rode a heat, semi-final and final. James was calling the race plan and steering. And what was noticeable was in the final, after 900 meters, I sort of jumped in all excited because the Italians had bolted on us. And I've looked and gone, okay, guys, if we go now, I reckon we can hang on to them and get back on them. And at the time, it was quite bizarre because Mike couldn't quite hear me, but he could hear this energy coming from young Ginn in the bow. And Nick Green was following him. And James was like, well, I knew what you were saying. And he was like, okay, you're basically taking over the race plan. But what was cool about the four was the adaptability on the water was quite remarkable. But Mike was unbelievable. Like, he was such a driver of that campaign in 96. James was probably, and has been probably in my mind, one of the greatest rowers the world's ever seen.
I agree.
And the understatement about Nick Green is Nick's rhythm and technical aspect and fluidity and the ability to follow and match up and harmonize with people is just second to none. So you got this young kid who's just verbalizing, going, "How good's this to be in this boat?" So for me, it was exciting just to be able to sort of go, "Hey guys, I can see what we can do and you can do. Just go now. Let's just go now."
Great to hear from Drew Ginn. So much to talk to him about. He's a 4-time Olympian, 3-time gold medalist. Yes, 3-time gold medalist. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans, who have 25 lenders on their panel right around Australia for Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures. So you win gold in 1996. What was the celebration like? Because I heard in 1992 the boys were on fire. Did you just get caught up with the other 3 experienced campaigners, Drew, in 1996 and have a party and also drag the rest of the team along with you?
No, that was very quiet, Dan. Very quiet. Nothing, no celebrations at all. Little medals around the neck, little chink of the champagne. No. I'll tell you a story. Chattermouse rules here. No, it could. I remember seeing Mike Mackay made the comment, which is now take it all in. And James was saying the same thing. Take it all in. Particularly their advice to me as a young athlete was it's a blur. It goes so quickly. And so what I love about it is what happens behind the scenes and all that sort of stuff. It's not out of control, but it's certainly athletes letting their hair down. But day 2, so the Sunday, so we've competed on the Saturday. Day 2, we're all a bit worse for wear. And James decides to do the nude run with the pretend flame with Gary Liner, a lightweight rower from Australia. Yes. They've done a lap around the Dahlonega town square once, and they got away with it. And then they decided boldly they'd go for a second lap around the Dahlonega town square, and then the police came out and arrested them.
Really?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, James is 6'7" tall, and when he puts his arm here, it's very hard to handcuff his arm. But they got one arm, and they couldn't get the other one. And the little police officer, she was a bit short, and she was struggling to get his other hand behind his back to cuff him. But eventually they threw him in the van and they said, look, we'll let you go, but you've got to put your clothes on. But they were reenacting the original flame from the modern Olympic Games, which was this tall athlete and this short athlete. And Gary was a short athlete, James was a tall athlete, and they're running around with the pretend flame. So it's all that sort of stuff that happens around the games. But I think, Dan, the one for me is the athletes really respect the history of the games. And so the athletes want to celebrate, particularly if they've had success. But even if they haven't had success, it's just that it's that ability to enjoy that moment of coming together as a bunch of athletes, not just from your own country, but from others. And so everyone lets their hair down, but generally it's pretty respectful. But it's a pretty wild week for a week. Like we finish in the first week. The water polo players finish in the second week, and they're trying to cram in a whole week of celebrations into one night, which is just, you can imagine what that's like.
Yeah, out of control, no doubt. The hockey players are the same, aren't they? I mean, they start the first night and they end the last day. So
that's right. And then let's be fair, Moneghetti, or the marathon runners, I use the Moneghetti effect. He's preparing for the whole 2 weeks to run the marathon at the end. He gets basically one night to enjoy himself. And because of what he's done in his training, one beer would knock him over. So we're just going to be really mindful as to, there's always different experiences going on at the Olympic Games.
Absolutely. Now, Drew, obviously you'd won one in 96. You had the taste for another one, a gold medal in 2000, but it wasn't in the fours. It ended up being the pairs. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, so, well, actually go back a slight step. So 2004 was the gold in Athens.
Yeah.
the 2000 experience was James and I trying to get
That's right.
to
Yeah.
the games, and I had an injury. But tell you, like the Athens experience was quite amazing with James and I. Like, so that had been 8 years of training and preparing, working through the mishap of Sydney. He went on with Matthew Long, and I love the idea of just remembering all the athletes who have been a part of these sort of experiences. Matthew Long was an unbelievable rower who was reserved for the national team and rowed with James, who got a bronze in Sydney Home Olympic Games. So 8 years later, we're in Athens, and James and I was almost like, we've been waiting all this time to actually go and row the pair the way we wanted to row it. We had a World Championships the year before in Milan where we won, and the Brits were very dominant at that stage, and we knocked them off, and we got to go to the Athens Games. But for me, I think the one that typifies it is the experience of rowing towards the finish line with James. He stopped moments before the finish line, and we started then celebrating as we crossed the finish line. And our coach, Chris O'Brien, at the time had sort of gone, guys, row through the finish line. And I pulled him back into my lap and I said, what were you thinking? He had his birthday 2 days before and he just turned 37. He was like, mate, just turned 37, just wanted to take it all in. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so, but I also think James thought that was his last games, right? And you've spoken to him, and he went on to 43 years of age. So this is extraordinary as to how long he kept in the sport for. Longevity, probably second to none. But that Athens experience was really cool because it was it was bittersweet missing out on Sydney. Like, everyone can appreciate that. And even though he had a result and performed, but to be back there in the pair was just outstanding.
How bad was your back injury? I mean, I'll go back a step because obviously you've won gold in the fours in 96. You then started competing in the pairs. You were with Mike in 98 in the World Champs. And then you were with James in the pairs in 99. And then obviously the back injury occurred. Why were you with Mike in 98 and then James in 99?
Yeah, good question. So Mike and I had rowed together late 95 and the 96 period, and James and Nick were rowing together. So basically what happens in the rowing is there'll be two pairs. They come together as the four. When Noel was coaching us, what he'd do is he'd often swap the pairs around. So we worked with the other combination and made sure we're all working and moving the same way. So I go to 97 World Championships. All the guys have a year off. Nick didn't end up making it back. He tried to. But James and Mike definitely came back. And so by the time 98 rolled around, it was like, well, Mike and I will continue doing what we were doing in 96. By this stage, James and Nick were rowing a pair and it was going pretty well. And we did the World Championships, but Mike and I then competed against those guys in the pairs. They got the Cox pair, we got the straight pair. We rowed a Cox four together because we actually didn't get the four selected, the straight four, which is Coxless, at the 98 Worlds in Cologne. Between Cologne and the next World Championships, what had happened was back home, we sort of went, okay, Mike and I aren't going to row together anymore. Nick's now retired. James and I sort of said, well, how about we give it a go to see if we can actually make a better combination and if we can make a better four. That was the intent originally. We didn't get the four going any better. Mike tried a few different crewmates. The four wasn't working, but James and I were going really well in the pair. And because we'd gone so well, the selector said, hey, look, you're flying in Australia. Why don't we put you in the pair for the World Championships? So within 1 year, I've gone from rowing with Mike at the World Championships, silver, to then James at the next year. So, and it was a difficult conversation, you can imagine, with Mike going, loved rowing with you, but it's not working. We're trying to do the four, but here's the pair. The effective thing that happened in that year was James and I went really, really well. We still thought the four might work. We came home, we tried the four, it still wasn't getting there. The Sydney guys with Bo Hansen, Jeff and James Stewart and Ben Dobble were flying with Tim McLaren. They were outstanding. And we could never get on terms of knocking them off. And so as a result, the selectors had no choice not to pick us. I got injured. So your question about me as injury was I ruptured the disc in my back 11 weeks out in the gym the first time. I then rehabbed on the way through. And then eventually in Lucerne, 7 weeks out from the Olympic Games, I ruptured the disc in my back again and eventually had surgery.
So it was obviously very disappointing, bittersweet, as you said. I mean, how tough was it watching James and Longy row in the pairs that you were meant to be in with your great mate, James Tomkins, in Sydney, a home Olympics?
Yeah, I think anyone would appreciate this. I was frustrated with myself because I sort of realised that I'd done it to myself. I got injured. I hadn't managed myself well enough. That was evident. I wasn't frustrated about them being out in the water. Like I never had envy about them performing. I was always so proud of what James was doing, and I was super excited about Matthew Long because I was pretty good friends with Longy. And I remember watching the race, like 600 meters out, when the crews came to us and they were in fourth place, and a guy called Zach Kirkham and I were standing on the sidelines. And the grandstand on the I think the southern side started at the 500 meter mark, and so we sort of jogged up as the race was coming through, and then all of a sudden we realised they were coming fourth, and we were sort of going, "Geez, they've really got to get moving here." And this just sort of typifies how my focus was on just willing them, wanting them to succeed. Like you miss out, you're frustrated, you're disappointed, you're pissed off at yourself, but actually you're excited by seeing them perform. And so we jumped over this little white chain security fence, which wasn't great security. And I'm following Zach. My back's killing me as I'm trying to run. He's carrying an Australian flag, which you actually see on the footage. And then we kept running all the way along, just cheering, "Go Aussie, go Aussie, go Aussie." And they rode from fourth place up into the third place position. And it was an amazing race to the finish. So, yeah, in my quieter moments, I was pissed off and annoyed and feeling, almost depressed. But in my public moments, I was very much sort of finding myself going, I was energized by watching all the athletes for Australia compete. I probably got one of the best spectator jobs at the Olympic Games, I must admit, because I got to see Kathy Freeman run. Got to see women's beach volleyball player win with Kerry Pottas and Natalie Cook. And so while I was missing out, I was actually gaining in that regard. And to see Matthew Long and James, go so well, I was actually really proud of, so. And I think that's the thing about rowing. You sort of get over yourself pretty quickly. It's always about how the team performs. And I still felt like I was contributing to that, even behind the scenes.
Four-time Olympian Drew Ginn is with me on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. You seem like the consummate team player, Drew. Have you always been like that, or has that been sort of drummed into you?
Oh, a bit of a mixture, Dan. I think I've always understood that in rowing, team is the ultimate. But like any rower, you've got to claw your way through selection. You've got to get selected. So, mate, I've been as selfish as anyone, like any athlete. And I've even heard James mention numerous times as an athlete, even with your partners and family and friends, it's like what we do is actually quite selfish as athletes. The rowing experience is actually all about team. So I remember jumping in the boat for the first time at school, the Brown McLeod experience, into an 8, and realising how important team is. So your question of, is it drummed into you? It's certainly coached into you. It certainly becomes evident that the only way to succeed in rowing is to have a team mindset. But I think almost every single person on the planet has an individual aspiration to wanting to feel a win or a success in anything we do. But I think, what I've come to learn is, how do I put it this way? James Tomkins, I still think is the best rower in the world. And while a good friend, I still look up to him. Nick Green, the same thing. Mike Mackay, Andrew Cooper, guys like Benny Dobwell. These are all athletes who I always thought were better than me as an athlete, better than me as a rower. And I love the fact that I was just fortunate enough to row with them. So I don't know what that says in terms of, was it drummed into you? Was it something that you learnt? But I always felt inspired by the athletes I was with. And even to this day, James and I were on the phone not long ago and we were reminiscing about some old races. And it was just like, I'm still sitting here getting off the phone going, I was just talking to James Tomkins. How cool is that? And we got to do what we got to do together, And so I'm 10 years his junior. But, and for me, like anything, team is what drives the world. When we work together with people, we get better outcomes. And rowing is just a sport that shows that out, I think, really evidently.
You won the same number of gold medals as James Tomkins, but you don't see yourself as an equal to him.
No. He's still better than me. So many things we do in a good way. Like it's like, I don't know. Like I don't know if it's just a respect thing or it's generational thing, but I've had some people say to me, so to pick up on your point, I've had some people say, you've won 3 golds and a silver. Like that version of that seems to be that you're one of the more successful athletes in rowing in Australia. And I go, I hadn't even thought of it. Like it's not, for me, I look at James as, it's a bit like a Matthew Pinson in Great Britain or a Steve Redgrave. I look at him and go, they're the Doynians of rowing. In fact, I know that I get contacted because people want to understand about how guys like James and Mike and Andrew and Nick rowed the Awesome Foursome boat. And I feel privileged to be a facilitator of that kind of conversation, which is, well, I can tell you a bit more about how the 96 crew did it. So I don't feel like an equal. I definitely feel like still the young kid, the student. James used to say this, Dan. We talk through everything he knows, but not everything we know. so, so I've grown up in that space, mate. I'm still just the kid.
I could imagine him saying that. Tell me, Drew, did you take part in the SPC ads? Or was it the first time around?
You know, yes.
You did?
Know that I was Pineapple.
Oh, Pineapple. Wow.
James was at the front singing. So my first fruit ad,
yes,
the gold medal, which is hugely embarrassing, was peaches and apricots and jumping out of the can with Mike and Nick, and James was singing out the front. So that was the first one I did. Yes.
Wow. That was no doubt a highlight or a low light.
No, there was a highlight. It was, how do I put it this way? Like, I hadn't won a gold medal and I'm being asked to act like I've won a gold medal. Like, that's embarrassing, like anything. But I'm sitting there going, how cool is this? I'm a part of the band. Like, I'm getting to play in the Beatles, even though I haven't played Beatles music, that sort of stuff. So, and it was 10 hours of filming for 30 seconds commercial. So you also get a bit of reality check about how much work goes into producing some of these things.
I can imagine, but then you have to think about the good money you made at the end of it, Drew. Set up your lifestyle.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of profit in fruit, Dan.
No, that's exactly right. You mentioned before about James being the greatest rower you've seen. How does he compare to Sir Stephen Redgrave? I mean, you mentioned Cracknell, you mentioned Pinson, who actually moved out of the pairs in 2003 because they'd virtually given up beating you guys, you and James, in 2004, which indicates they had so much respect for you and went back to the fours, which Great Britain dominated with the great Stephen Redgrave. So where does Redgrave compare with James in your mind?
I'll probably couch it sort of like this. Redgrave's definitely the most successful Olympic rower. That's not questionable in my mind. I think to do 5 games, 5 gold medals, and for GB rowing, he was largely, with his crew, the only gold medalist in 88, 84, 92 kind of thing. And so that's that level. Now, James hasn't had the results like that, but I think if you look at the way they rowed and the way they inspired and had others feeling about rowing, I actually put James Tomkins slightly ahead. And what I mean by that is people still talk about and discuss using James Tomkins and the Oarsome Foursome as a model for how to row. It's relaxed, it's fluid, it's super effective. Where Redgrave, Pinson, these sort of guys, unbelievable physical capacity and unbelievable competitive spirit. So results determine their ability to stand on top of the table, I reckon. But in terms of impact on the sport and just inspiration for people to go, that's what I want to row like. I generally hear people want to row more like a James Tomkins Oarsome Foursome than like a Steve Redgrave, Matthew Pinson. But I'll give you the perspective I have. I reckon Matthew Pinson was the better athlete than all of them.
Really?
Physically the better athlete. And I guarantee if he had been motivated, he could have won 6 games, gold medals over a 6-game period. And I reckon Redgrave, if he was here and questioned, he would say Matthew was better than him. Matthew physically was just another level again. And when you see athletes like, so where Matthew and James, I'm going to use James Tomkins and Matthew Pinson, both a bit laid back in certain features and maybe didn't always do the training at the highest level, but had the ability to produce a result and produce performances and give their crew real confidence when the time was required. Redgrave, unbelievable worker and talent and just consistency year upon year upon year upon year. So for me, if I sort of look at even the GB situation, I reckon Pinson, if he had gone for another games or another 2 games, if he had wanted to, he could have kept winning gold medals. No doubt in my mind. And so while Redgrave is the best on results, for me, James Tomkins is the best in terms of the movement and inspiration about how he moves. Pinson probably trumps them all, to be honest, to be fair. And I think most people who ever raced him were just so fearful of what he could do if he just turned his engine on and went, like it's just dominant, really dominant.
The fact that he and James Cracknell, Drew, decided to go into the fours, did you feel that the gold medal was there for yours to lose? I mean, you never get ahead of yourself too much, but I mean, they were probably your main opposition, weren't they?
Yeah, main opposition. I think to give you a bit of context around James Cracknell, a bit similar to Mike Mackay, from my take, both hugely competitive and just got the absolute most out of themselves. James Cracknell, Matthew Pinson together in the pair weren't the perfect pair. So when we beat them in the Milan and they'd beaten us in Seville the year before, we sort of knew that by them making a decision to go out of the event, it was like, okay, that's one less truly competitive pair that is in the field. So we had the Croatians, we had the South Africans, we had the Canadians. There was a number of pairs around, but I think for James and I, it was like, okay, we know that if we do our process and recipe and we hold ourselves together and don't get injured and we keep pushing ourselves when no one's pushing us, so that was the whole thing, then the gold is ours to win. I wouldn't say the gold was ours to lose, but the gold was ours to win. I think my view of the Olympics is often athletes do decide and coaches will decide that, do we really want to risk going for a gold if it means that we might not get the bronze? And it's a really interesting dilemma, which is if you think you're a bronze medal or a silver medal athlete, do you take the risk of having a real crack at a gold and maybe come fourth, fifth, or sixth? In our minds, it was like, we're going gold no matter what. But I do think part of that experience was watching. I mean, GB went out to get a gold to ensure they didn't risk it over here. So yeah, it wasn't a fait accompli, but certainly for us was, if we keep doing what we're doing, there's no reason why after Athens we're not sitting on the finish line going, what a great 3-year campaign. But they weren't the perfect pair. Matthew Pinsett and James Cracknell, they were a bloody good pair and they were the world's best time, but they just weren't a natural fitting pair. It never looked super comfortable. I know James Cracknell well enough. He was rowing his other side like Matthew Long did in 2000. And so that's just not a natural situation as well. The fact that they went as fast as they did, I think was an unbelievable credit to them and Jürgen Grobler, their coach. But for them to keep doing at that level was always, I think, going to come under pressure. But equally, they could have found other pair combinations and raced us and maybe beaten us. You know, so you never know. But the South Africans, Croatians, New Zealanders who were there in Athens, we always felt that if we always all rode our best races, James and I were like, we think we are better than them on our best race. If we row poorly, then they'll beat us. If they row poorly, then the gaps could be huge, you know. And so that was the thing why we didn't go and compete that year. We stayed away from competition, not because we wanted to avoid it, we're scared of it. It was like, our best thing is to peak for Athens and really focus on that final race. And that's what we did. Yeah.
Drew Ginn is a 4-time Olympian. We're here for Aussie Home Loans for Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures. So do you think by having the breaks that you guys had, it prolonged your careers?
Yes. Yeah. I've got a simple response to that. I think pushing all the time, the body eventually, you know, doesn't quite respond as well as you need. I think having a break or doing things that are different really helps. The 4, I think, probably took it to the extreme after 92, to be fair. They had a break after 88, from what I heard. But after 92, they almost had a longer break. And I think that made it hard for them to come back in 95 and 96. But I think a 12-month or a 6-month refresh or doing different things, I think for a lot of athletes can be really helpful. I mean, history would say the Oarsome Foursome probably had more longevity than most athletes that have had in Australian rowing ever. And they always took time off after the Olympic Games, and they always did things with Noel and eventually, you know, with Chris and other coaches that was a little bit designed to get into the next campaign, not to have success every single year. And so I'm not criticizing the way things get done this day in professional sport and all that sort of stuff, but I think refreshing, letting the body recover, you know, fully resetting, trying new things is helpful. Yeah. So I saw with the 4, definitely my experience, I wouldn't have got through to 37 years of age and if I hadn't had some key times off to recharge, reflect, recalibrate.
So at the end of 2004, James is 39. Did you think that would be the last Olympics for him? And did you have plans to go again? Or obviously you had a decent break. You felt after having a decent break, you were ready to go.
Well, it was interesting. So I was very, in my mind personally, so I was clear that I was having a crack at Beijing. I knew that. I was also, while James and I were finishing off the pair, trying to recruit potentially because I was excited by the idea of doing a 4. And I thought, if James wants to go on, that's awesome. Let's get the very next best athletes in the country, Duncan Free, Bo Hansen. So we actually had a Zoom call. I was living in Port Melbourne at the time, Dan. We had a Zoom call with these guys on the phone, and we were discussing the idea of, hey, look, could we make this happen? Dunks and Bo are in Queensland. James and I are in Melbourne. This has sort of probably been the 4 best athletes in the country, really, in rowing. And there's other athletes that are unbelievably good and at that level. And it's like, hey guys, if we just woke up to this, why wouldn't we try to do this? Now, Bo eventually didn't go on and have another go at the games, and he's had back injuries. Dunks and I then started training together and rowing together as a way to get to this forward. James had a year off, and eventually he and I, had the conversation, which was, well, I'll keep working with Dunks. Let's find the next person. If it's not Bo, it was Sam Conrad at the time. We tried to get a four going. That was the intent. Problem that probably didn't help us was that Dunks and I went to the World Championships in 2006 and won that World Championships. And so in our minds, it was like, right, the pair is good. If we can get the four to the same level, then we've got choice. We've got a bit of a dilemma. But we never quite got the four at the same sort of level. And we weren't, I think, really all committed to that. And so James and Sam were doing the 8 process. We were doing the pair process.
It's amazing that James got to the Olympics at the age of 43, and it was a complete turnaround for him, wasn't it? The 360 started in the 8s in 1988 and finished in them in 2008. And as we know, had so much success in the 8 with the King's Cup with Victoria, who dominated for many years.
Yeah, and how do I say this? I felt personally, I loved seeing it, right? So I love seeing him there, 43 years of age, flag bearer, like that. That was awesome to see. His wife, his kids were there. I mean, personally, my wife and kids were there. But just to see that whole experience coming to that zenith point, I was so frustrated and disappointed that the 8 didn't go as well as everyone knew they were going. They'd done better in training. I mean, he probably has mentioned that. There was a few things that happened, heat row, where steering, all that sort of stuff. But at 43 years of age, the fact that I was watching him, thinking to myself, he's still doing what he's been doing since he was 30. It's just for me, we had a sports scientist, Tony Rice, and at one stage, James goes, Ricey, am I the fittest 40-year-old, 41, 42-year-old athlete you've ever seen? And Ricey goes, I've seen some good endurance athletes, James. But in effect, you sort of look and go, there's not many Olympians, there's not many athletes who are at their prime at 43. But what we've now seen is we're seeing a lot of athletes with the right support, with the right opportunities, who can go well into their 40s. So I'm not saying he's rewritten the script on that, but certainly for me, I sort of sat there and said, bloody hell, he's impressed everyone. He's rowing in the 8. It is full circle. The 8 hasn't quite performed, but I think they could have been together for another 6 months and they might have been top end of the final. The 8s are weird like that. Sometimes you just need a little bit more time, a few more races. But I was so proud of him. Bridget, I said to her one day, I'm proud. And she said, you sound like an old man. It's like, he was my coach. He was my teammate. And then to see him still performing at that age, I loved it. Awesome to see him do it.
Were you confident going into 2008 with Duncan, considering he was a sculler? Did he have to change the way he rowed or not really? I mean, for those that don't know the sport like you, Drew, you might be able to explain to everyone. Yeah. Do you need to change much from being a sculler, where, of course, you're using 2 oars, to being a sweep rower, you just use the 1?
Yeah, so to give a bit of an explanation, so the sculling, they're using 2 oars, 1 oar out each side off the hands. Yep. They do it in the single, which is 1 person, 2 people double, 4-person quad.
Yep.
And then in the sweep rowing, which is 1 oar out each side, we've got 1 oar each. And the oars are almost, just over 3 meters long. Sculling, just under 2.5 meters, thereabouts. You've got the situation where they're in control of both oars, where we're in control of the 1 oar, but we need someone who's rowing out the other side to balance us off. So you have the pair, then you have the 4, and then you have the 8. Lots of adaptation and change for Dunks. We first rowed Ngambie at a national championships. So James was having the birth of his children, the twins, for memory, little Holly and Georgia. And so Bridget's in hospital. He stayed there for that during the nationals part. And so we sort of said, Dunks and I will go out for a row. And he was sculling, and then he jumped in a sweep boat, and physically talented, capable, but it was horrible. It was like really? His profile, the way he produced power, his platform balance, all that sort of stuff was all over the shop. And I remember sitting there going, I know he's really good, because I was pretty good friends with him. I was like, I know he's really good, but this is not showing any signs of potential. But I said to him, if you could just relax and do this and row it like a sweep boat. So it's almost like you row with the arc of the blade in sweep rowing, where the sculling, you're very much center of the boat, and you're producing lots of power in a shorter profile. But Dunks had rowed sweep before. He was adaptable. So he had to learn how to row sweep. but he'd done enough of it that he could. And what I was really impressed by with Dunks was he was just so open to learning. He'd come, bronze medal in 1996 with the quad with Tim McLaren as a coach. Disaster in Athens when they didn't make the final. It was a fourth place, I think, in Sydney. So by the time we've rolled around into Beijing, he's just desperate to have success. So he was so willing to learn whatever he had to learn to row sweep really well, and he invested the time and energy in it. And a bit like James, like 200 centimeters tall.
Gee.
James is 100 kilograms. James is 200 centimeters tall, 95 kilograms. So these guys are they're unique specimens when you stand beside them. And the big Queenslander, we called him Big Mitts. Very adaptable.
Big hands, massive
Yeah.
So going into that particular race in Beijing, you'd won back-to-back world championships, which again was a mighty effort considering, as you just explained, Duncan had to learn how to sweep row and learn pretty quickly, and you've had success pretty quickly. You must have thought, gee, we're a good chance here.
Yeah, I think very good. I think we're in Eton, which was the Olympic course for London. So, 2006, obviously a preparation for London, a bit like what we used with the Sydney Regatta Centre early before 2000. When we raced the Worlds there, it was tailwind conditions, which is really fast. The water starts flowing and you almost get breaking waves down the course. And the New Zealanders have been the dominant crew over a couple of years. And I'd raced the New Zealanders in 2004, so I knew exactly how good they were. Dunks was still learning the craft of sweep rowing, but he was well and truly, going pretty well then. But as soon as we had success, it was like, actually, this is going to be pretty special. Now it's going to be, and this is where the selfishness comes in. It's like, it's going to be pretty special to do a four or do a pair. And how good is it to feel like we're actually setting something great up? And I remember crossing the finish line with Dunks, and I actually made a mistake. I'd actually caught my oar under the rigger of the boat with about 400 meters to go, and we sort of stopped momentarily, and then we got rowing again. And I was like, well, if you can make a mistake like that, and the crew can stop and still get to the finish line ahead of everyone else, it's like you're doing it pretty well. And then to have the next success the next year in Munich, where the margin was ridiculous. And context of this is when James and I won in 99, the way James rode and the way we rode in the pair, we had 7 seconds on the field with 1,500 meters to go in St. Catharines, Canada. And it was like, after the regatta, everyone's going like, we just don't see crews do that sort of stuff. And then in Munich, Dunks and I were so far ahead of the field with 500 meters to go, and it was a really similar thing. So for me, it was almost like, wow, this is a bit of deja vu. Like I'm getting a chance to row with another exceptional athlete, and I'm sitting here in this boat going, bloody hell! Like, so you don't in your mind let yourself ever think that you're going to win the gold in the games, but in your mind you sort of do go, hey, this is heading in the right direction. So it's that sort of feeling of it's trending in the right way. It's exciting. How do we keep the pressure on what we're doing? But the way he rode, the way he adapted and improved in the pair was outstanding. And I think for both those pairs, James and myself and Dunks and myself, it felt like we really set the scene of what pair rowing did with the Kiwi pair who came along and then set a whole bunch of world records in how to approach racing, which was flat out, go as fast as you can all the way down the track, get as far out in front of the field if you can, and don't hesitate, just roll all the way to the finish line. And it's a dominant way of racing that's very hard to compete against.
You're a multiple world champion, 3 of the 5 disciplines in sweep rowing. And of course, I mentioned 3 gold medals in Olympics. Most people, when I ask this question about world championship gold medals or Olympic gold medals, they say the Olympics. Are you the same? Was that true?
Or it depends on what you're describing. So, I'm Olympics are the pinnacle. That's not a question of mine. But what I do want to say is the experience of how you row the boat or you perform holds a very special place. So 96, outstanding, gold medal, unbelievable, Olympic Games, childhood dream. But I have the 2 vivid memories in rowing, which was 99 World Championships and 2007 World Championships, which I sort of find myself holding those performances up as high as any other Olympic campaign. But the Olympic experience of winning gold trumps everything, right? That's being at the Olympics trumps everything. But those performances felt like they were as good as I experienced in a boat. You're in flow state. your teamwork, your feeling of harmony, the boat really being on top of the water, never getting bogged down. I probably can't go past the two performances. But yeah, the games tops everything, but the performances are different. And I think the games brings out a pressure that often you don't do your best rowing in a final at the games. Often you don't do your best rowing at the Olympic Games or your best performances. I don't see many world's best or world records being set at Olympic Games, Dan. I often see the best dealing with pressure. Yeah, and that's rowing, but all other sports. And so the Olympics tops everything in terms of the status.
Yes.
I think any performance you have as an athlete that you feel like you've been in flow state and really got the best out of yourself, that holds a very special place in your heart.
So if you are in a sport that has a world championship and an Olympic Games, the world championships are probably downplayed a fraction, aren't they? Even though they're a massive event.
They are definitely downplayed in terms of status. But that's the point I'm making is I think sometimes we do performances where you sort of look and go, it's not the games, it's not the worlds, it's not the hierarchy of events. It's like that performance felt unbelievable. And that's sort of what you go to bed at night and you sort of find yourself going, oh, 99 St. Catherine's. You sort of have these sort of thoughts pop into your head rarely, but just when they pop into your head, it's almost like it's the experience of being in a team or rowing together or executing in your execution. And then you realize it's like, I'm focusing on that, not the status of the event. And so the games as a status trumps, definitely. World Championships are next down. And that's in a lot of sports. But I think you'll find for a lot of athletes, there's still unique performances, irrespective of the status of the event, where they go, oh, that holds a special place. And so, how do I say this? If I had gone to one games experience, then I'm looking at the games going, the games is it. But having gone to 4 games experiences, I sort of go, I like the idea of the performance. How well did you combine with your teammate? How did you elevate what you did above your competition? How did you deliver on all the training? And did you perform under pressure? Now, that could be a games or that could just be a major event, to be fair there. So, the game status, I'm just repeating that, the game status stands out, but sometimes the performance really sits, quite amazingly different in your heart.
Aussie Home Loans is our sponsor for dashing down to Olympic adventures with Olympic great, one of the all-time great superstar, Drew Ginn. And we're here, as I say, for Aussie Home Loans. Areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash-out construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. So you've won the World Championship in 2009. And in my intro, I said that you got involved in another sport. And for our viewers, that other sport starts with C. It was cycling.
Oh, yes.
Did you think you might have been a chance of representing Australia because you did well in the Oceania time trial on the road, did you not, Drew Ginn?
Oh, Dan. How do I describe this? I did represent my country in cycling, and it wasn't in Oceania cycling. I'll go back a many, many steps. I was a 9-year-old kid and I raced at the BMX championships in Gifu in Japan.
Really?
Yep. Cameron Mitchell from Shepparton won the world championships racing on a Diamondback bike, and I was racing on a Hutch bike and sponsored by them. So I laugh about the cycling thing. I did have a crack at cycling in a bit of a transition period. I'll give you the story. I went to the Oceania Champs down in New Zealand.
Yeah.
The Victorian Institute of Sport started doing some testing. John O'Hall was a coach there, triathlon coach. Dave Saunders was the cycling coach. They got excited about, here's this big rower, and I'm not the biggest rower, right? So it was interesting. Like they're going, here's this big rower who's producing power. So on the bike, I'd ridden most of my life. So cycling was always a love of an activity I really enjoyed doing. They then said, okay, to have a crack at trying to be a time trialist or a 4K pursuitist, we're going to go to this Oceania Champs. So I've gone down to New Zealand, right down the bottom of New Zealand, and windswept day. Scott McGrory, who you'd know.
Know him well. He's been on our program.
Right. So Scott McGrory's there, and he's been teed up that he can help me in the car following on the day. And I knew Scott from the games. And again, he's having a bit of a laugh going, here's this big rower having a go at cycling. It was windswept and Invercargill down south, right? So horrible, windy, cold conditions. And the bike's going sideways. I'm trying to hang on to it. So I've started when I've started, and I'll mention a name here because this is how I know that I was never going to make it in cycling. I finish and I've won the Open division.
Mm.
And then moments later, Scott walks up to me and says, "Hey, Drew, you did really well. Well done on that ride." I'm going, "Thanks, Scott. That's good." And he goes, "You might have got the Oceania spot, which could actually get you onto the national team." I'm going, "Geez, that's pretty exciting." He goes, "Yeah, but there was a rider who went quicker than you today." And I went, "Who was that?" And he goes, "Michael Matthews."
Oh, really?
So a very young Michael Matthews out of Canberra had come
Yes.
down and won the under-23 Oceania championships, and he beat me by 2 minutes. So I knew full well on that particular day that my cycling career was here and the real cycling people were up here.
So were you, though, serious enough to think that you could maybe represent Australia with enough work, with enough time in the road race, maybe in 2012?
Not the road race so much. I suppose where my mind was at. So yes, belief in myself that if given enough time, I think I could learn what I need to learn, maybe on the track in an individual pursuit, not on the track in a team pursuit, because there's a lot of complication around that. Or in the hour time trial kind of setup on the road, which is very much you just physically going. So I had enough belief that I'm improving, I'm getting better, I'm learning how to be more aero, I'm doing the testing, I'm doing the training. I had enough belief that, okay, if I keep getting a chance to work and train at this, like in rowing, I will get better and better. That's an unusual sense of optimism, I suppose. What I was really clear on, the realistic situation was, if I had to do a road race, I had no road racing skills, no road racing now. So I hadn't had enough years of experience of that. So that was clear. I was also big. So reality was, if it goes uphill, I'm out the back door. But on a 4K pursuit on the track, with my power and with my aeroness, it was like, actually, this starts to look like you could go pretty fast. And in an hour time trial on the road, it's like, okay, well, given the fact that it's not up and down so much, you might actually go pretty well. But the reality was, I had Cam Meyer, who was quicker, Luke Durbridge, who was quicker in the road time trial. I competed at the Nationals that year. I had Michael Matthews knocking me off by 2 minutes. Like, I wasn't, in my mind, it was like, I'd love to give this a go long term, but the reality is these guys, even at their young age, under 23s, they were better. And so I would have to lose a lot of body weight. If it was road racing, I'd have to learn a lot of skills that were probably just not going to come my way naturally. But the sport changed. I don't know if you remember this. It went from individual time trial on the track, 4K pursuit, and team pursuit, to then just being team pursuit. So all of a sudden, the team conversation was, well, mate, you're not really a part of this squad and you don't know how to ride a team pursuit. You've got good power, but we don't see you in 2 years' time doing enough to actually make that group. And I was okay with that. But what I learned from cycling and the training specifically was hugely helpful in the lead up to London in the 4, that's for sure. So it was a life lesson. And while I wanted to get there, I wanted to give cycling a real crack. I was actually, really appreciated and enjoyed all the support that I got from people that have helped me out and learned a lot,
So do you think if you didn't do some cycling and take a decent break from rowing, you wouldn't have gone back to London for 2012 and go back to where it all started in the 4s?
Ooh, very good question, actually. Dan, I haven't been asked that, I don't think, before. And I probably haven't even stopped to think about it. I think if I hadn't have cycled, I wouldn't have been as fit and I wouldn't have been as motivated and curious about, okay, how do I apply this back into rowing? So maybe the answer is I might not have come back to rowing, to be fair. I don't know the answer, but cycling gave me the bridge to give rowing a go again. And it refreshed me while at the same time doing a lot of training that physiologically tuned me up even further, specifically. So yeah, it's a good point. Like, I might have rowed, but I don't know that I would have rowed and even made the team in London if I hadn't had the cycling period for 18 months, 2 years.
Well, you went back to the 4. Why the 4s? And of course, in that team was Josh Dunkley-Smith, some good rowers here, James Chapman and Will Lockwood joining Drew.
Yeah, a bit of nostalgia. I always liked the idea. I mean, you heard about the Beijing piece. I like the idea of getting a 4 back on the water again. I always loved how the 4 moved. I loved the history of the 4 in Australia, the competition between GB and Australia. I was rowing with Josh. I'd heard about this kid that was unbelievable. Funny story is I'd rowed with him at club level at a club race, but but I didn't even remember he was in the bow seat. 2 young kids straight out of school were sitting in the bow seat, and Josh Dunkley-Smith was one of them. And David Crawshay, who was an Olympic Beijing gold medalist, and myself were down the other end of the boat for Mercantile. And so we remember meeting all these athletes, but we all just basically jumped in on the day and raced. And then I reached out to Josh after I heard he was going really well. And I was like, mate, do you want to give the pair a go? You'd like to go for a row one day? And I reached out to Noel, who was coaching Josh in Canberra. And so then Josh and I started training together. And one unbelievable person, talent, loyal, physiologically unbelievably gifted. And so it was like, okay, start working on this combination, and can we find a 4 combination? And so in my mind, it was like, right, I've got 3 years to see if I'm good enough. Don't know if I am, but am I good enough to find a new pair partner? Am I good enough? And when we tried this with Dunks and again, that guy, Sam Conrad, who we talked about, I was starting to sort of think maybe we might find a new 4 with Josh, Dunks and Sam Conrad. And Sam got sick, and then Dunks got hit by a car on his bike. And so eventually the whole 4 kept going, but it was almost like this revolving door of athletes who were being trialed and given a go. So there was always a motive of putting a 4 on the table. I was always comfortable personally, which was, am I in it if I'm good enough? If I'm not good enough, I'm not in it. I'm okay with that. But I always felt that Australia could dominate and win the 4 again. That was always my sort of view. And I wanted to, towards the end of my career, be a part of redoing that process and seeing if we could get ourselves back on terms with beating GB, basically.
So you got James and Will to join yourself and Josh.
Yeah. And an amazing crew. Will Lockwood came through my same school, Scotch College, before I was there for 4 years boarding school. Will went through there right the way through. James Chapman, I'd seen around the team for many, many years. He was 32 by this stage. Call it a journeyman of the sport. And then Josh and Will were both 23, 24. And I'm now 37, right? So that's a bigger age gap than what I had with the 4. And the imprint of the 4 on me, I think, was really helpful to bring to that crew. We also rode the year before with guys like Nick Purnell and Will Lockwood. Sam Lockwood.
Yes.
They were really good. And there was a squad of Australian rowers in that period of time who I was always amazed by. But Will was unbelievable, light, nimble, athletic, great rhythm. James Chapman, that is, was so good at just matching up the rhythm and had a really good feel for the boat and a really good understanding of the team dynamics and maturity there. And then Josh and myself. And so I don't think anyone expected us to go so fast. And the day we got put together as our first trials, it flew. And Lyle McCarthy, who was the coach of Kim Brennan, who won gold in Rio, he walked up after the trial, and we're in Penrith. He goes, mate, that looked great even when you paddled off, and it looked fantastic when you raced down the course. And he said, how's all the other 4s felt? And I said, mate, that 4 felt like it clicked and really went. And so straight away we knew once we rode together it was something special. And so it was a matter of then getting through the trialing process and seeing if that was still the 4 that was there. And I love working with those guys. I mean, just to know that Will and Josh, that was the start of their career. And for me, it was the end of my career. And for James, he'd been in that real transition of probably not making the team the first year at the Games in Athens, but reserve. And then being in the team with James Tomkins in Beijing, and then finally the 4 together winning a silver medal. And I actually remember his dad giving me a hug and saying, thanks for looking after my boy in that year. And, just love that feeling of family and connection. It was really powerful.
Were you disappointed you didn't win gold, or silver was a great result to finish it all off?
Yes, sitting on the finish line, when you first cross the finish line and you realize that you've put everything into it and you've tried to win gold, we definitely sat there, and I definitely felt, and I know the guys felt this, which was, damn it, we didn't get gold. Disappointed that we gave it our all. We didn't hold back and all that sort of stuff. And it probably took 15, 20 minutes, half an hour after the race to let those emotions go. And Chris O'Brien, our coach, actually made a comment, which was, it almost took until we came together on the pontoon after all the media stuff and all the medal ceremony. And then finally, I don't know if it was Chris or I, we both said something, which is, bloody hell, how good was that campaign? How good was that race? How good was everything we did? And as soon as we said that, particularly the other 3 athletes were like, oh, cool, we can relax and enjoy this. And so it had probably been 45 minutes of not tension, but certainly, not sure about, could we really celebrate and enjoy a silver medal? I now say, and I've reflected on this a lot, Dan, is I look at that campaign with everything that went on and where we were 12 months earlier with the different crew. I'm equally as proud of that campaign than any other gold medal campaign. And so while, you have that tinge of disappointment that you don't get gold when you cross the finish line. More minutes since that race, more hours, more days since that race, I've actually felt super proud about the whole campaign and the guys that we all got to do what we got to do together. And I hold a silver medal up there equal with the gold in that regard. And London produced really big medals, so it's the biggest bit of hardware I've got.
Well, were they bigger than the what? How much bigger?
Mate, it's like a dinner plate. It is huge. And if you look at the Athens medal, you've got London's like this and the Athens medal's like that. And the Athens medal's a beautiful medal.
Yeah.
But the London medal's this big chunk of metal. BHP were the sponsors in London, and I reckon they want to outdo everyone. It's like every games. They almost try to get bigger and better every games. But yeah, it's a lot of athletes I think talk about. I think the media sometimes do this where an athlete crosses the line, gets interviewed, 4th place, 3rd place, 2nd place. And often it's almost like, you must be disappointed because you look like you could have won gold. And it's like, you have those moments, but really quickly afterwards, the celebration of the games, just the whole experience tops everything. And we had such a great, I think, experience together as a group. And it was very reminiscent of the early days of Oarsome Foursome. It was like the bond you have together and then the connection with family and friends that they all get to share on the journey. That goes past any medal, any result sort of thing. So, and for me in my heart, that, as I say, like it sits up there the same sort of level, that's for sure.
I was there on the Saturday, the last day of the rowing. I had a day off from the ABC, and I just loved every minute of it. It was a great atmosphere. I know Great Britain did really, really well in the rowing, and there were people everywhere. It was just really, really good, wasn't it? I mean, in regard to the Olympic Games you went to, was London as good as Sydney? I know you didn't compete in Sydney, but you were there. I mean, they were probably the two that stand out, wouldn't they? In regard to the way they were organised. I know Athens was good. I was at that one. I didn't go to Beijing, but I heard it was pretty good. And Atlanta had its issues, but still was okay, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think if you classify the games as to athlete experience, you would say London and Sydney top everything. The volunteers make it, and the organising and the coordination of the organising make it, because then it's less stressful. And we did an amazing job in the Sydney Games. I was a spectator, but just the atmosphere around every event you went into, all the stuff beside the events was outstanding. And London did the same thing. What was really interesting, we had people who are family friends travelling on the tube, and I don't know if you heard these stories, but they'd been to London numerous times, and on the tube it was almost like tube of mystery, of misery. Everyone's sad, everyone's pissed off, everyone's upset and grumpy. No one's talking to each other. The 2 weeks of the games, everyone's looking at each other, smiling, talking about what events are on, what have you seen today, and so it was just a friendly atmosphere. As athletes, that's a wonderful thing to be a part of. The vibrancy, and you said this about the games. What London did really well was the crowd that came out was vocal. And I would say the London crowd was more vocal than what I heard in Australia, and more vocal than what I heard in Atlanta. But Atlanta's crowd was very much universal. It was very much a world crowd. And so while everyone's cheering, what I saw in London was it was this intensity when GB crews were in races. And we had that in Sydney, where we had an intensity when Australian crews were racing. So I can't tell you what it was like in Sydney on the water because I wasn't there. But in London on the water, it was so deafening that in a semi-final, James Chapman behind me is calling out the plan, and I still couldn't hear him. So I knew at 500 meters to go, this was the call. I knew at 250 meters to go, this was the call, but I couldn't hear him. So I just knew that as the marker went through and I could hear him make some sort of sound, and I'm going, bloody hell, like I could not hear a thing. And it was so deafening and consuming. So Sydney might have been like that, but because I didn't have that experience, I can't compare. But I didn't have that experience like London in Athens or Beijing or in Atlanta. And so having a host nation so procreal, so proud, and coming out en masse, what they did to build up over years to get to that London experience where the whole country was so behind it, the sports were going so well. As athletes on the water, it's like, I can imagine what it's like running out on the MCG when you've got a crowd like that in London, because it just was so deafening. That's like, I can't think, I can't work. You try to do what you do. But GB dominated. It's rare for a home nation to dominate and have the pressure of the home crowd and still dominate. Like, it was just an extraordinary games in rowing, in cycling. I mean, their cycling performance was through the roof, So, and if you remember, 1996, 1 gold medal for GB, and it was 1 gold medal in rowing, no other gold medals in the whole of GB sport.
Wow.
And in London, they've won heaps of gold medals, and lots of sports have been doing really well, and rowing dominated, so that's a legacy I think is just extraordinary.
Well, on that Saturday, they won a lot of gold medals in the cycling, as you said. They won a lot of gold medals in the rowing. I think Steve Redgrave's crew, I remember seeing something on television before I went out to the rowing where his crew was distraught. They just missed out on winning and they couldn't even do a TV interview. And he was involved with the BBC and the TV coverage.
Yep.
They just lost, but they won everything else. And then in the athletics, Mo Farah's gone out and won a gold medal. And they also won the heptathlon. They won the long jump through Rutherford. They won everything except the soccer team got knocked out that day, Drew, and they were more disappointed about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Why it's the number one sport.
Never happy.
No, never happy. Now, you obviously retired after 2012. Did you know that would be your last Olympics? You didn't consider doing a James Tomkins and getting into your early 40s and having a crack in 2016?
Oh, this is a contentious issue. I didn't know I was retiring. I never retired. I've actually never officially said I've retired. I'm
still haven't retired.
I'm still available if the national team's listening. No. I'm still keeping fit just in case.
Good.
I remember finishing in 2012, and because I'd watched James do what he did up to the age, in the back of my mind was like, okay, well, it's possible. Mike Mackay in Athens was 41 as well. So it was sort of like, okay, this has sort of become a bit more normalized, and it wasn't normal before. And a guy called Yuri Janssen in 2004 was an Estonian guy that rode on to 41, 42 as well. So I hadn't retired, but a job came up with Rowing Australia to be the head coach of integration.
Right.
Chris O'Brien spoke to me, the chair, the CEO at the time, and was like, Drew, consider putting your hat in the ring. And I went for the role, got the role, and I did that role for 2 years. I've always, and why I say it's contentious in my mind, because I've always sort of thought to myself, if I hadn't taken that role, I probably would have given it another go as an athlete. Like I still now, I've got too much energy. So I don't have any regrets, by the way, just be clear there. But in my mind, I was like, okay, cool. I'm now putting my energy into this and trying to help the team in another format, another role. But yeah, it's, I don't like the idea of saying you're retired. It's almost like, we're going to keep doing things in life, keep finding challenges. And I love watching the athletes now. So to give you an idea of linking across, I'm watching the team. They've just done a World Cup, men's 8, women's 8, all dominated the World Cup before, medal results and all that sort of stuff, women's pair. So I haven't retired, but I've certainly, I'm well past my time, but I love seeing when the athletes are making the best of their opportunities and performing. And I love just, it doesn't matter what the sport is. I love surfing. I love watching the skating. I'm looking forward to Paris. It's going to be huge just to watch all these alternate sports as well as the traditional sports. And just be an athlete who has been an Olympian and is an Olympian. We always say you're an Olympian for life, but just knowing that you get to sit and watch it with a bit of an understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, which is a unique position to be a spectator with.
Maybe you could go to LA, Drew, as a 53-year-old in the breakdancing.
50. Imagine that. Not only would I be breakdancing, but I'd be breaking as I'm dancing.
I'm sure you would be. Just on age, I mean, Andrew Hoy, 8 Olympic Games, 61. Now, it's a different sport, equestrian. You've got to have a decent horse. And if your mind's still active and your body's still okay, you can keep doing it. He's missed 2 Olympic Games because he didn't have the right horse. But he went to 8 Olympic Games. And Bill Roycroft didn't start till most people have retired at 45 in 1960. And his last Games was 1976 at 61. So people do go to a fair age. The shooters are another example of that. They're often in their 40s or 50s.
And what we're seeing now, I think it's fascinating. So surfing is in the Olympic Games. Kelly Slater is over 50, 52, and still surfing at one of the highest levels in major waves of consequences. So you look at that and you go, okay, so that's a short power sport. It's very strategic, skill-based. The endurance sports, we know, if you can't do the training, you probably can't get ready. And the sports that have high impact, so the runners, long-distance runners, that's got an issue with it. But I actually think for rowing, there is no reason, and I haven't seen any evidence that is to the contrary of this, there is no reason that if you were motivated and you were consistently doing the training, that you couldn't go on to your late 40s. Where the barrier, I think, does come in is like, how do you have the motivation to go for another campaign? Do you have the support? Have you got your career set up and all that sort of stuff? And a few rowers, we talked this in Melbourne years ago, which was if you're financially set up in your career and you could then take yourself across to your sport and financially secure, you'd probably keep going. But between family and work and all this sort of stuff. So I like the idea, Dan, that most athletes have a 10 to 15 year shelf life, but how you get to that start point and how you finish off from that start point can be vastly different. Now, that could be 15 years of age in swimming to 30 years of age. Yeah, and it's still sort of the rough time frame. But we also know that, if you're not enjoying the activity, you could be 24 years of age and go, I've done what I've done. I'm not enjoying this anymore, so I'm out. And so for me, if you love it and you're motivated and you're willing to do the training and you're not getting injured, or you're overcoming injury, there's no reason why you can't keep going. I just think this notion of the older athlete declining, yes, I think beyond 50 plus, it starts to happen. There is no issues about it. And Andrew Hoy, they're still strong. They're still powerful. They've still got to manage a horse. A horse is a huge beast.
Correct.
You can't be thinking I'm less than what I was 15 years ago. You've got to be thinking I'm better than what I was 15 years ago to manage this whole process, I would have thought.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's one of only 13 athletes to go to 8 Olympics or more. I mean, that is just an unbelievable performance. Yep. And as I say, he missed out on 2, so he could have gone to 10. But you have to applaud him for that. I applaud you too, Drew. Your back's all right, is it?
Back's good. I can touch my toes if I bend my legs. There you go, touching my toes under the chair there.
Excellent.
Now, I've had 2 back surgeries.
Right.
And I'd say now I feel like my back's as good as ever. Like time, as long as you look after yourself, I'd sort of have a view that things get better. I surf now. I surf ski paddling has been really good for it. But yeah, when I had the surgeries, I never thought I'd row again. I'd never thought I'd bike ride again, all that sort of stuff. My surgeon Gary Speck always said, stop doing these things. But it's good. And it's just a matter of staying active and healthy in life. I think like so many people who are, your body's, it's getting older, but if you don't use it, it's going to decline, right? And if you don't use it well and look after it, then it declines quicker. So, I don't even think about the surgeries now. I don't even think about the back issues. More sort of knee aches and shoulder aches and all that sort of stuff.
Well, Drew, I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful to catch up with one of the all-time greats, Drew Ginn, who went to 4 Olympic Games, would have been 5, but he was injured for Sydney. He won 3 gold medals and a silver medal in rowing. And, of course, he won a gold medal in the 4s in 1996, a silver medal in the 4s in 2012, and gold medal in the pairs in 2004 and 2008. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures, who can deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. They do Zoom as well. Their areas of expertise, the purchasing of property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, personal loans, any loan you like. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Drew, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. Thanks for your time and enjoy the Olympic Games.
Thanks, Dan. Looking forward to it. You go well as well.
Thanks, mate.